Imagine discovering the person you married was secretly entwined with your own mother, and that revelation didn't just break your heart, it shattered your world. While she wore the rings of marriage, he was breaking the bonds meant to bind blood. And when the truth finally came out behind prison bars, everything changed. And before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Hannah Carter was 30 years old the day she entered the county courthouse in handcuffs. The charges against her would send ripples of shock through the quiet town she had called home her entire life. To most, she was the kind of woman you'd overlook in a crowd, quiet, almost reserved, with a soft smile that didn't give much away. Her family didn't visit often, but those who knew her personally described her as caring and deeply protective of the few people she truly let in. Her husband, David Carter, was 32, a self-employed contractor who had built a reputation for being reliable, honest, and charming in public. At community gatherings, he was quick with a handshake, always willing to offer a neighbor advice about home repairs. But behind closed doors, he was different. Quieter, his silences felt deliberate, his thoughts locked away. And then there was Linda Hayes, Hannah's mother. 55 years old with kind eyes and an easy laugh, she was the type of neighbor everyone trusted. She had lived in the same house for decades, raised her daughter there, and now helped care for her granddaughter. She was a familiar face in the community, bringing casseroles to church potlucks, chatting with neighbors over the fence, and offering rides to anyone in need. To those who knew her, she was dependable, almost unshakable. From the outside, the Carters' life seemed almost idyllic. Hannah and David had been married for just over 2 years, raising their infant daughter in a cozy home not far from where Hannah grew up. The rhythm of their days was steady and familiar. Mornings began with coffee, Hannah perched on a kitchen stool, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, while David scrolled through the news on his phone. Afternoons were filled with work, errands, and the constant needs of a baby. On weekends, they often visited Linda's house just 2 blocks away. There, they would share dinners, talk about the baby's latest milestones, and sometimes linger on the porch long after the plates had been cleared. Linda adored her granddaughter and gladly stepped in to babysit whenever Hannah needed an extra hand. In a town where most families knew each other by name, theirs was seen as wholesome and strong. But beneath the surface of this picture-perfect routine, something had already begun to change. It started with little things. David coming home later than usual, his phone lighting up with messages he didn't seem eager to share. One Thursday evening, Hannah had prepared a casserole for dinner at her mother's house, a tradition they had kept for years, but David never arrived. No phone call, no text. By the time he walked through the door just before 10, the casserole was cold and Hannah's questions were met with a short explanation of work ran late. His tone was flat, almost rehearsed. The following week, dinners became quieter. David picked at his food, eyes shifting towards his phone more often than toward her. Conversations that had once been easy now felt forced, broken by long silences. One afternoon, Hannah sent her mother a text. "Is everything okay? You seemed off." Linda replied quickly, "Just tired, sweetheart." Hannah didn't push further. She told herself they were all under stress, but the unease she felt didn't go away. It lingered, silent, heavy, and impossible to ignore. It was a detail so small that it could have been dismissed. One evening, Hannah hugged her husband as he came through the door. The scent clinging to him wasn't his usual cologne. It was lighter, sweeter, familiar. It was the same floral perfume her mother had worn for years. She told herself she was imagining things, that scents cling too close in unexpected ways, but once you notice something, it's hard to not notice it. A week later, Hannah was in the garage, digging through a box of baby clothes. Through the thin walls, she heard laughter, David's deep, warm laugh, and over it, Linda's lighter, unmistakable voice. The sound was
different than the usual playful banter she was used to hearing. It was softer, closer. Her chest tightened, she stood still, hand frozen on the box, as their voices dropped into quiet murmurs she couldn't quite make out. And in that moment, something inside her began to shift.
In the weeks that followed, Hannah tried to carry on as though nothing had changed. She went about her daily routines, packing David's lunch, folding laundry, feeding their daughter, but the quiet doubts in her mind had started to take root. Every time David's phone buzzed, she noticed how quickly he turned it face down. When she asked simple questions, "Who was that?" or "Everything all right?" his answers were vague. He'd smile in that way people do when they want you to stop asking. Linda's visits to the house seemed more frequent now. Sometimes she came by when David was home and Hannah was out running errands. Other times, she'd arrive just as Hannah was leaving for the grocery store, offering to keep an eye on things while she was gone. Hannah told herself her mother was simply being helpful, but deep down, she was beginning to doubt it. One evening, after putting the baby down, Hannah sat across from David at the kitchen table. The clock ticked softly in the background. "You've been spending a lot of time with my mom lately," she said, trying to sound casual. David didn't look up from his plate. "She's just helping out. You know how much she loves the baby." The answer should have reassured her, but it didn't. His tone was too flat, too quick. She didn't press further, not that night. Later, as she loaded the dishwasher, she caught a glimpse of David through the kitchen window. He was standing outside, phone in hand, speaking in a low voice. She couldn't make out the words, but she recognized the faint, lilting laugh on the other end of the line. It was her mother. From that point on, Hannah began watching them more closely. At family dinners, she noticed their stolen glances across the table, the way David's hand would brush against her mother's as they passed dishes, the subtle, knowing smiles they shared when they thought no one was looking. She told herself she might be overthinking this, that grief over a fading marriage was making her paranoid, but the pattern was too clear to ignore. One afternoon, she stopped by her mother's house unannounced to drop off a bag of groceries. She walked in to find David and Linda sitting close together at the kitchen table, speaking in low tones. When they noticed her in the doorway, their conversation stopped instantly. Linda's smile was too bright, David's greeting too forced. Her heart was pounding. She didn't ask what they were talking about. She didn't need to. That night, lying awake beside her husband, Hannah stared at the ceiling and felt something inside her harden. She had tried to give the benefit of the doubt, tried to believe in her marriage, but the weight of suspicion was crushing her. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't bring herself to voice. Why my mother? How long has this been going on? And the one she feared most, what would this do to our daughter? David shifted in his sleep, turning away from her. Hannah closed her eyes, but the image of her mother's smile, so familiar, so warm, now felt like something foreign, something dangerous. She didn't know it yet, but the path she had just stepped onto would lead to a night the entire town would remember, and to a decision that could never be undone.
In bed, staring at the ceiling, she knew something with absolute clarity. Life as she had known it was over. But how it would end? That was still hers to decide. The days after that quiet dinner felt like walking through glass. Every word David spoke, every visit from Linda scraped against Hannah's skin like a fresh wound. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't eating. At night, she lay awake, listening to the slow, even rhythm of David's breathing beside her, wondering how many lies could fit inside one man's lungs. By the first week of November, something inside her had calcified. The part of her that once prayed for a way to repair what they had was gone. In its place was a cold, unwavering clarity. David told her he'd be working from home that Thursday. Hannah made coffee, set it in front of him, and kissed his cheek like she'd done 100 times before. He smiled, unaware. It was almost noon when Linda came by. She knocked twice, then let herself in. Hannah was in the kitchen, knife in hand, dicing vegetables she had no intention of cooking. She could hear their voices from the living room, low, warm, with the kind of ease that only comes when you believe no one is watching. Something broke. Hannah walked into the room. The knife hung loosely at her side. She said, "We need to talk." Her voice so steady it startled even her. David looked up, puzzled. Linda shifted uncomfortably. "What's going on?" David asked, still half smiling. Hannah stepped closer. "I know," she said simply. "I know about the two of you." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. David's expression shifted. Confusion, then guilt, then something colder. "It's not what you think," he began, but Hannah's laugh cut him off. It was a sound she didn't recognize coming from herself. Sharp, almost hollow. Linda tried to speak, her voice shaking. "Hannah, please." But Hannah was already moving. The knife felt heavier now, as though it knew what was coming. And then there was no space for thought, no time for questions, only movement. When it was over, David lay slumped against the couch, the pale fabric blooming red beneath him. Linda's screams filled the room, echoing off the walls, and for a moment, Hannah just stood there, watching, breathing, almost calm. The police arrived 20 minutes later. The neighbors had called after hearing the shouting. Hannah didn't resist. She didn't cry. She simply handed over the knife and let them cuff her wrists. As they led her past the flashing lights and the sea of faces gathered on the sidewalk, Hannah glanced once toward her mother, who was still kneeling beside David's body. Their eyes met briefly. Two women, bound now by something far darker than blood. In the patrol car, as the engine hummed to life, Hannah stared out the window at the small town she had once believed would be her forever home. She knew she'd never see it again except through bars. But deep down, she also knew this story would never belong to just her. It would belong to everyone who heard it, everyone who wondered how love could twist into something unrecognizable, and how betrayal could make strangers of the people closest to you. So, was Hannah a victim pushed past her breaking point, or a woman who made the ultimate, unforgivable choice? Would you call what happened justice or murder? Let us know in the comments. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Thanks for watching.